When the Doomsday rule descended, everyone in the world was forbidden from using the word no and any words expressing a negative meaning. As long as you say the word no, you will die on the spot. And my neighbor used this iron rule of not being able to say no to steal all my stored food. Lambai, I am out of water at home. Can you give me half of your water? Lambai, I am out of food at home. Can you give me the food you have left? After he robbed me of all my food, he grabbed my hair. Zhang Hao squatted down and grabbed my hair. The last pack of biscuits from your house. Really tastes quite good. He laughed presumptuously, deliberately chewing loudly. I glared at him fiercely but could do nothing. Finally, I died in endless hunger and humiliation. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day before Doomsday arrived. I listened to the gentle, coquettish voice of my neighbor Zhang Hao's wife, Lin Xue. Darling, are you willing to treat me well for the rest of your life? I smiled. This time, the roles of hunter and prey should be reversed. Not only will I make him spit out double of all the supplies he took from me, I will also make him personally hand over his most cherished wife and child and let me take everything else he possesses. In this world where you cannot say no, any question could become a sharp blade that strips you of everything. In my previous life, I was like a dog passively accepting judgment. I failed to understand how the rules played out immediately. The rule of not being able to say no seemingly gives the questioner infinite power, but its true core is logic. As long as your question is ingenious enough, you can trap the other party in an unanswerable paradox. And as a top law student, playing with logic and language traps is what I do best. I then got out of bed, confirmed that today was indeed the day before Doomsday, and then checked my bank card. The balance showed 200,000, money left by my parents for my graduate studies. With the arrival of Doomsday, this money turned into a string of useless numbers. But now, it is the first fulcrum ill-used to pry open my revenge. I immediately used my phone to open the city's largest supermarket chain app and started frantically adding items to the shopping cart, listing all the necessary supplies I could think of. 20 minutes later, an order worth 200,000 was generated. Finally, I typed a line in the remarks section. Are you willing to accept my order? The second I clicked send, the order confirmation page popped up. It was done. I looked at the still peaceful world outside the window, and a cold smile tugged at the corners of my lips. Zhang Hao, the game has begun. When 9 a.m. arrived the next morning, a cold mechanical voice echoed simultaneously in the minds of 7 billion people worldwide. Rule announced. From now on, the use of the word no, and any words expressing a negative meaning, is forbidden among all intelligent lifeforms. Have a pleasant game, everyone. After a moment of dead silence, the world erupted with a landslide, and tsunami of screams and chaos. I stood by the window, coldly watching downstairs. At this moment, a man was panicking and saying to another man, "Don't come over." The next second, he was wiped out by an invisible force, reduced to nothing. Instantly, waves of terrified screams echoed around, but I just calmly closed the window, shutting out the wailing from the outside world. Just then, my phone rang. The manager was calling. His voice trembled as he incoherently said, "No, it didn't. Why are people dropping dead like that?" I simply replied calmly, "Are you willing to deliver everything according to the order?" Hearing this, the other end of the line fell silent for a moment. Then a huge truck parked downstairs and several pale-faced porters started moving the supplies into my house under the friendly negotiation between me and the manager. The apartment I rented was on the 3rd floor with no elevator, so my supplies quickly filled the entire corridor. Neighbors peeked through their peepholes with eyes full of fear and greed, but no one dared to come out. It wasn't until the last box of supplies was carried upstairs that the porters, exhausted to the point of collapse, looked at me with trembling lips. "Sir, can we leave now?" I just smiled and kicked them a few bottles of water and some bread. "Of course, do you want to leave right now?" They snapped out of it and scrambled away. I closed the door, and standing atop the mountain of supplies, I finally felt a genuine trace of exhaustion. But this was just the beginning. I opened the newly bought toolbox, took out the tools, and began reinforcing my shelter. In my previous life, it was because I was soft-hearted and answered my neighbors' cries for help that I exposed the fact that I had supplies. The crying and begging drew in that vicious wolf, Zhang Hao. In this life, my world only needed quiet. I spent an entire afternoon sealing up all the gaps in the doors and windows and installed 3 extra locks on the bedroom door. After doing all this, I lay on the sofa. There were still a few boxes of water left in the hallway that I hadn't had time to bring inside. I caught my breath, got up, and prepared for the final wrapping up work. Just as I was dragging the last box of mineral water, the door opposite creaked open. Zhang Hao poked his head out. His face wore a perfectly measured, genteel smile of a typical nice guy. But as his gaze swept over the supplies in the hallway that I hadn't yet managed to move inside, I clearly caught a gleam of greed flashing deep in his pupils, exactly the same as in my previous life. When he cornered me against the wall, he saw me and let out a faint sound of surprise. "Xiaobai, are you moving?" he said as he slowly strolled out. His eyes were glued to the box of mineral water beside me, like a snake flicking its tongue. I didn't answer, and just looked at him quietly. On the surface, in my previous life, it was exactly this hypocritical that made me let my guard down. He played the role of an older brother, showing false concern and step by step coaxed all my information out of me. Finally, when I was at my most desperate, he bared his fangs. Seeing that I didn't speak, he didn't feel awkward either. He just chuckled to himself. and pointed at the box of water by my feet. I stared intensely at that finger, almost unable to control the urge to smash it with a wrench in my hand. I had to stay calm. Now was not the time. The prey had already walked into the trap I set. What I needed to do was let him willingly step right into the center of the bear trap step by step. He thought he was still the hunter in control of everything, and thought I was still that foolish prey he could easily manipulate. He wanted to use a simple question to test me, to test if I understood the rules, and to test my bottom line. He wanted to pry open my door at the minimum cost, and take my things. Then ill let you ask. Every single word you ask will become the news that hangs you. Jiang finally stopped his one-man show. He bent down, leaned his face close to mine, and using what he thought was a very affectionate tone, smiled and spoke. Xiaobai, it's such a hot day, can you share half of your water with me? Here it came. The question, like a pebble thrown into stagnant water, stirred up ripples. In the stuffy hallway, the air rippled outwards, circle by circle. Time seemed to freeze. I could even see the tiny dust particles in the sunset's afterglow. The smile on Zhang Hao's face still maintained that perfect curve, his eyes filled with determined expectation. He was certain I couldn't refuse. After all, the rules treated everyone equally. In my previous life, facing his same question, I panicked, stammered, and didn't know how to respond. Finally, under the invisible pressure of the rules, I tacitly agreed. That box of water became his first step into my home and my descent into the abyss of hell. But now, looking at his hypocritical face, my heart was unusually calm. He thought he asked a very clever question. Can you share half with me? This was a typical ambiguous question. This question hit several traps. He used the familiar relationship between neighbors to disguise robbery as sharing. He exploited the mandatory nature of the rules so that I couldn't say the word no. If I agreed, he would successfully and at zero cost test the boundaries of the rules and my weakness. If I panicked, if I started bickering with him, he'd be even more convinced that I was brainless and easily manipulated. Your cheap smile can touch no one but yourself. I looked into his eyes and suddenly smiled. My smile was very faint and light, even carrying a hint of innocent confusion. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I tilted my head and slowly spoke in an extremely naive tone. Brother Zhang Hao, I didn't quite catch that. Did you want to ask? I paused deliberately, watching his pupils shrink slightly at my counter question. Then I enunciated clearly, word by word, translating for him all the unspoken subtext in his previous sentence. Are you willing to take half of the bottled water you worked so hard to buy and carry upstairs and give it to me for free? Is that what you mean, right? The hallway was dead silent. I saw the smile on Zhang Hao's face faintly stiffen. His eyes suddenly changed, revealing scrutiny and vigilance. He probably didn't expect that I, the somewhat introverted and even slightly stupid neighbor boy in his eyes, would say something like this, laying his subtext nakedly on the table. He couldn't answer this question. If he said yes, once he admitted it, his gentle, good neighbor persona would collapse on the spot. In the apocalypse, someone who publicly admits to wanting something for nothing would instantly become a public target. But he also couldn't say no, because saying no would get him no water. Several neighbors' doors in the hallway quietly opened a crack, with countless ears and eyes pressing against them, watching nervously. Under these apocalyptic rules, during this first confrontation, I could feel those gazes lingering between me and Zhang Hao. Fine beads of sweat seemed to appear on Zhang Hao's forehead. His Adam's apple bobbed, clearly running his selfish brain at high speed, trying to find a way out. Unfortunately, I wasn't going to give him the chance. Just as he was about to speak, trying to use different rhetoric to skip the topic, I smiled again. This time, my smile was deeper, even carrying a hint of mockery. I didn't give him any time to breathe, immediately throwing out my second question. Or, I deliberately dragged out my voice, my gaze looking over his shoulder toward the half-open door behind him. Did you want to ask if you could trade your beautiful wife, Lin Xue, for this half of the bottled water? Zhang Hao's brain buzzed loudly, and the string called reason snapped instantly. His face instantly turned from a stiff white to a dark liver red, and finally turned ashen. He glared at me fixedly, the greed and calculation in his eyes completely replaced by shock and fury, as if he couldn't wait to pounce on me and tear me to pieces. And my words were like a depth charge. From behind several doors in the hallway came irrepressible gasps simultaneously. The thrill of gossip clearly far outweighed the fear of the apocalypse. Then, the most fatal scene occurred. Behind Zhang Hao, the door creaked and was pushed completely open. Lin Su's elegant and beautiful face was filled with confusion and unease. She had obviously heard the argument and came out to check, only to be caught off guard and hear all the vicious words I had just said. Time seemed to slow down at that moment. I saw the color drain from her face, turning as pale as paper. Then her gaze snapped from my smiling face to her husband, Zhang Hao. She was waiting for an answer, an explanation, and Zhang Hao was pinned to the pillar of shame. By my hellish question, he was cornered, under the prying eyes of all the neighbors, and in front of his beloved wife. He couldn't admit to the first question, which would cause his social death. He especially couldn't admit to the second question, unless he wanted his family ruined immediately. But he couldn't say no either. The air was filled with the thrill of a public execution. I folded my arms and watched him leisurely. Zhang Hao, which one do you actually want to ask? You pick one, so I can answer. Aren't you? Finally, Zhang Hao, pale-faced, grabbed Lin Xue, and ignored my question, walking back to his room quickly. And I also returned home proudly, with my last shot of water. Late at night, there was a knock on my door. The sound was very light, carrying a kind of hesitation and tentativeness, as if afraid of disturbing something, yet carrying a trace of undisguised despair. I walked behind the door and looked out through the peephole. The voice-activated light in the hallway was off, leaving it in total darkness, but by the faint moonlight streaming in through the window, I could still clearly see the pale, tear-stained face outside was Lin Xue, Zhang Hao's wife. She was holding a thin and frail child in her arms. The child was asleep, with a small, wrinkled face that seemed very uncomfortable. She looked much more haggard than during the day. Her lips were chapped, and her eyes were hollow, like a flower devastated by a rainstorm. I didn't open the door, nor did I make a sound. I just watched her quietly like this, watching her in the dark, trembling slightly out of fear and helplessness. Finally, as if she had exhausted all her strength, she pressed her forehead against the cold door and let out an extremely suppressed whimper. Please. Her voice was thin and weak, but like a tiny hammer, it struck the dead silence of the hallway. Only then did I speak coldly through the door. Did you want to ask if I am willing to give you some food to save your child? The person outside the door shuddered all over, lifting her head abruptly, as if she had seen a lifeline, and also as if frightened by my directness. She choked and nodded frantically. Yes, my child has had a fever and hasn't eaten for a day. Please. I didn't respond immediately. I was wondering, where is Zhang Hao, the man who kept saying he loved her and would treat her well for the rest of his life? Ah, that's right. He must be going mad with anger right now from the public humiliation during the day, venting all his incompetent rage on his wife and child. When a man loses face outside and only takes it out on his wife and child at home. I saw this kind of drama too many times in my previous life. I unlocked the door, but only opened it a tiny crack. The door chain was still firmly fastened. I passed it out through the crack in the door, a carton of milk, and 2 individually packaged small buns. Let the child have something to eat first. Lin Su's eyes instantly lit up, and she hurriedly reached out to take them. Those were hands that had once been well maintained, but now the knuckles were turning white from tension. Just at the moment her fingertips touched the milk carton, I didn't let go. I lowered my voice extremely low, like the whispers of a demon drilling into her ears through the crack in the door. A man who only cares about his own face and ignores the life and death of his wife and child, do you still expect him to protect you? Her body stiffened, and the hand holding the milk carton recoiled sharply as if burned. I could clearly see the light in her eyes dim rapidly at that moment, replaced by a deeper confusion and pain from having her mind read by me. I let go, and the milk and buns fell into her arms. Then I slammed the door shut, shutting her and all her emotions outside. I didn't look at her again, but I could hear her stumbling footsteps running back to her own home. Immediately after, from next door came Zhang Hao's roar. You actually went to that bastard to beg for food. I've completely lost face because of you. Then there was Lin Xu's suppressed crying and the muffled sound of a heavy object falling to the floor. I leaned against the cold door panel, a sneer forming at the corner of my mouth. Fortunately, the cracks had already appeared, but this wasn't enough. About 10 minutes later, the argument next door stopped. Instead, it was replaced by the sound of Zhang Hao walking in the hallway and his deliberately amplified, anger-filled voice. He was knocking on the neighbor's door. Brother Wang, are you asleep? I need to tell you something. What kind of good person is the guy across from me? He used those bullshit rules to force my wife to kneel to him just in exchange for a bite to eat. Sister Bai, you must be very careful. That man next door is a demon. He wants to use the rules to rob us of everything we have and destroy our families. Rumors are the cheapest yet sharpest weapons in the apocalypse. He can easily stir up people's fear and malice. Soon, footsteps echoed outside my door again. This time, it wasn't just one person, but the chaotic footsteps of at least 4 or 5 people. They stopped at my door, like a pack of hounds catching the scent of blood. I looked out through the peephole. Zhang Hao stood at the very front, with a twisted, vindictive sense of pleasure on his face. Behind him stood several tall, burly men, all residents of this building. Some held baseball bats, while others gripped wrenches. The tension instantly peaked. The breathing outside the door was heavy and chaotic. Separated only by a thin security door, their greedy malice almost condensed into physical drops. Lan Bai, open the door. Zhang Hao's voice came through the door, carrying suppressed excitement and disguised toughness. He had clearly learned his lesson from earlier today. These 4 short words were all imperatives, avoiding any minefields that might trigger the rules. I stood behind the door, looking through the peephole at this twisted face. Behind him, Brother Wang was weighing a bloody hunting rifle in his hand. On the other side, Sister Li, though empty-handed, was staring fixedly at me, or rather, at the boxes piled in the entryway. The green glint in her eyes was more terrifying than a hungry wolf's. These weren't neighbors. They were clearly a flock of vultures that smelled blood. I didn't move, and just stayed perfectly quiet. We all live in the same building as neighbors. In times like these, we should help each other out. Seeing that I remained silent, Zhang Hao softened his tone a bit, trying to pry my door open with moral blackmail. You bought so much stuff, you can't use it all alone. Share a little with everyone, and we'll all remember your kindness, right? Yeah. Xiaolan, just open the door. We just want to talk to you. Brother Huang chimed in, the pipe wrench in his hand, subconsciously tapping against his palm. The corners curled into a cold sneer. Coming to talk armed with deadly weapons? If it were my past life, I might have tried to reason out of fear, or handed out supplies out of soft-heartedness. But in this life, this door was the boundary between life and death, and the stage for my revenge. I cleared my throat, and my voice calmly penetrated the door, reaching everyone's ears clearly. Zhang Hao, do you want everyone to know that, to hog my supplies for yourself, you purposely tricked them into coming here as your scapegoats? These words were like a basin of ice water, instantly extinguishing the heated atmosphere outside the door. Dead silence fell. Zhang Hao's face visibly stiffened. He opened his mouth, his atoms apple-bobbing violently. He wanted to retort, he wanted to explain, but under the rules, these were the scythes of the Grim Reaper. Saying no meant dropping dead on the spot. Saying I didn't meant instantly turning to ash. He could only hold it in, his face turning the color of pork liver, the veins on his forehead throbbing wildly. The neighbors standing behind him instantly had a change in their eyes. The seeds of doubt, once planted, watered by the panic of the apocalypse, would grow wildly into towering trees. Brother Wang's pipe wrench froze in midair, his gaze shifting between me and Zhang Hao. Don't listen to his nonsense. Zhang Hao finally squeezed out a sentence, his voice sharp with nervousness. He just wants to sow discord. Once we get in and get the stuff, we can all share it equally. I chuckled softly, my laughter full of mockery. Everyone, do you really believe a man who uses his own wife as a bargaining chip will share food with you? The commotion outside grew louder. Sister Li covered her mouth in surprise, looking Zhang Hao up and down, with a gaze like she was looking at trash. Lin Bai, shut up. Zhang Hao flew into a rage, out of humiliation, slamming his fist hard against the door. Let's all smash the door open together. I'll take responsibility if anything happens. What a you'll take responsibility. I fiercely unlatched the lock. With a crisp click in the dead silent hallway, it sounded like a thunderclap. The people outside clearly didn't expect me to open the door willingly, instinctively taking a half step back. The door slowly opened, but only a crack. The sturdy security chain remained tightly fastened, completely separating the world inside from the outside. I stood behind the crack in the door, revealing only one eye, as I coldly stared at this mob. Who wants to make the first move? I slowly pulled a box cutter from my pocket and pushed out the blade. Although this knife might seem utterly non-threatening to them, in this world of rules, language is my true weapon. Looking at the most muscular man, the pipe wrench in your hand looks heavy. If you use it to smash open my door, are you willing to take the risk of home invasion that leads to sudden death for your whole family? Brother Huang's hand violently shook the pipe wrench, nearly dropping it on his own foot. This was a logical trap. Although the rules only forbade negative words, the rules also judged intent. If I defined this as a robbery, and he couldn't deny it, because he couldn't say no, then logically he would be tacitly admitting to the robbery. And under my guidance, once he admitted to such a high-risk behavior, his inner fear of death would be infinitely magnified. Brother Wang stuttered. He wanted to say, I am not here to rob, but he couldn't. He was cornered by this very sentence, with all escape routes blocked. What? My eyes remained cold, as my gaze swept across everyone present. Or maybe Sister Li, are you willing to risk everything for a bite of Zhang Hao's food and leave your children in this world? As orphans, Sister Li trembled all over. Her previously greedy gaze was instantly replaced by terror, and she violently shrank back, as if she had been burned. You see, Zhang Hao, I spoke through the crack in the door. Looking at the livid neighbor, no one is willing to die for you. Zhang Hao was already on the verge of a breakdown at this point. He originally thought that by relying on their sheer numbers, they could force me to submit, or even break the door down by force. But he forgot that in this world where saying no was impossible, any moment requiring justification was fatal. It was a judgment. Not only was he unable to refute my accusations, he couldn't appease these people without triggering the rules either. Everyone. Zhang Hao made one last desperate struggle. He turned around, with his back to me, facing the neighbors with a fierce look in his eyes, only by taking his stuff. Can we survive? Do you all want to starve to death? Starve to death. I seized upon this phrase, and threw out that fatal dagger once again. Zhang Hao, since you are so selfless, and don't want everyone to starve to death, then those 2 boxes of sausages and the bag of rice hoarded in your house, why don't you bring them out and share them with everyone first? This time, the air completely froze. Everyone's searchlights fixating deadly upon Zhang Hao. It was the gaze of starving beasts, looking at their prey. Zhang Hao's pupils contracted violently. He did indeed have food hidden in his house. That was his final trump card. He never ever expected that I would know about it, and he certainly didn't expect me to expose it publicly at a time like this. You're talking nonsense. He subconsciously tried to deny it, but the word nonsense isn't an absolute denial. He was frantically testing the waters on the brink of death. Talking nonsense? I laughed. I smiled radiantly. Then are you willing to take everyone to your house right now to have a look? As long as everyone takes one look at your place. If I am wrong, I'll hand over everything in my room with both hands. Are you willing? Zhang Hao was cornered. This was an absolute ultimatum. Either he takes them home and exposes the fact that he's hoarding supplies and gets scavenged by the neighbors, or he refuses. Although he couldn't explicitly say no, if he stayed silent or made excuses, it would be a tacit admission that he was deceiving everyone, admitting that he wanted the neighbors to act as cannon fodder while he kept all the goodies for himself in the back. No matter which path he chose, the prestige and persona he had built within this little group would completely collapse. Sweat ran down Zhang Hao's forehead into his eyes, stinging them painfully, but he didn't even dare to wipe it. He looked at those pairs of eyes, turning from suspicion to anger, and then into hatred, and his legs began to tremble. Brother Wang, go take a look. I opportunely twisted the knife. Brother Wang turned his head and stared sinisterly at Zhang Hao. Zhang Hao, Xiaolan is right. Since we are all supposed to be helping each other, how about we check out your place first? Yeah. Zhang Hao, didn't you just say we should split everything equally? Sister Liz's voice also became harsh and sarcastic. You can't just split other stuff and keep yours. The spearhead originally aimed at me shifted again, completely changing direction in just a few short sentences, fiercely stabbing toward Zhang Hao. This was the apocalypse. This was human nature. Nothing is more solid than self-interest, and nothing is more fragile than self-interest. Zhang Hao backed away in panic, his back bumping against my door. He could feel that behind the door was my cold gaze, and he could also feel that in front of him were the burning, demanding stares of the neighbors. He was being roasted over the fire until his skin split and flesh tore. Zhang Hao stammered incoherently. He wanted to find an excuse, like his wife being sick or having lost his keys. But under this intense pressure, his pitiful IQ was completely insufficient. He was afraid that saying one wrong word would lead to his sudden death on the spot, and even more afraid of being eaten alive by his neighbors if he admitted the truth, scram. Ultimately, in extreme fear and anger, he roared this word at Brother Wang. Brother Wang froze for a moment, then his face darkened. He smashed the wrench in his hand hard onto the ground. Fine, Zhang Hao, you're just using us as your pawns, aren't you? Let's go. Brother Wang waved his big hand signaling the others. Let's go home. Anyone who pays attention to this guy from now on is a complete idiot. The crowd dispersed even faster than they had gathered. They had originally come solely for their own interests anyway. Now finding out that Zhang Hao was a scammer trying to get something for nothing, and even had a private stash hidden at home that he refused to share, their resentment was even greater than if they simply hadn't looted anything. Soon, Zhang Hao was the only one left in the hallway. He leaned against my door, as if his spine had been ripped out. I spoke softly through the crack in the door. Zhang Hao, look at you now. Well, it seems your allies have all abandoned you. Zhang Hao suddenly turned around, staring fixedly at the door crack. The bloodshot veins in his eyes looked as if they were about to burst. At this moment, he looked exactly like a mad dog, wanting to bite someone, but with his teeth broken off. Are you willing to go home now? I asked again, with a tone as gentle as an old friend. Or do you want to stay here and wait for me to ask my next question, like more details about your pretty wife? Hearing the word wife, Zhang Hao was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. The daytime humiliation and his current frustration intertwined, making him completely lose his mind. But he didn't dare attack me. The sword of the rules hung over his head, along with the neighbor's contempt. He felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He could only swallow all his anger. He kicked viciously at my door, letting out an incompetent, furious roar, then turned and rushed toward his own home. With a bang, the door next door was slammed shut. The whole building seemed to tremble with it. I, on the other hand, slowly closed my door, and the world was peaceful again. But I knew this was just the calm before the storm. A person like Zhang Hao was extremely selfish and cared deeply about his pride. Having lost so much face out there, with all his schemes falling through, and suffering social death in front of the neighbors, he couldn't take this dark anger out on me, nor could he take it out on the neighbors. So, in that enclosed space, the only one who could bear his wrath was the person he considered his private property, Ling Xue. I walked to the wall to listen to the commotion. Soon, I heard the sounds coming from over there. Things being smashed, the man's hysterical cursing, and the woman's desperate crying. You useless piece of trash. You traitor. The roaring from next door was crystal clear even through 2 doors. Was it you? Did you tell him we had food at home? Was it you? Accompanied by a crisp slap, Lin Su's scream pierced my eardrums. I leaned against the sofa and closed my eyes. Time ticked by minute. The sky outside completely darkened. The beating and scolding next door lasted a long time and only gradually died down late at night. I knew the time had come. That door, closed by Zhang Hao himself, would soon be opened again. I sat in the darkness, quietly looking at the door. Sure enough, after about half an hour, very light footsteps came from outside the door, followed by a faint, almost inaudible knock. They had arrived. I stood up, walked to the door, and looked out through the peephole. By the pale moonlight from the window, I saw a face covered in tear stains and bruises. It was Ling Xue. She was holding her son, Xiaobao, in her arms. She just stood there quietly. I knew she was gambling on whether I would open the door, whether I was willing to give her a way out. Of course I was willing, but not out of kindness. Rather, because she was the final puzzle piece to crush Zhang Hao. Taking her in would destroy him more than killing him. I didn't turn the doorknob right away, but pressed my lips close to the cold door panel. Using a voice only the 2 of us could hear, I spoke softly. Ling Xue, are you standing at my door to ask a question? The figure outside trembled violently, and her trembling voice came from the dark. She only managed 1 word before breaking into sobs. I waited patiently, like a hunter guiding his prey step by step. Did you want to ask? Are you willing to give me and my child some food? I said it for her. She was silent for a moment, then the faint but clear word came, yes. Or perhaps my voice taking on a cold, scrutinizing tone. Did you want to ask? Are you willing to take us in and give us a safe place to stay? This question was much heavier than the last one. Accepting food was merely a transaction, but accepting shelter meant complete betrayal and submission. The silence outside lasted a full half-minute. I could imagine the intense inner conflict she was experiencing. Finally, as if she had exhausted all her strength, her voice came out hoarse but firm. Yes, very well. I slowly placed my hand on the lock and opened the door a crack. Outside was Ling Shu's miserable appearance. Her hair stuck messily to her cheeks. Her mouth was cut and oozing blood. A clear handprint was swollen high on her left cheek, already starting to turn purple. Xiaobao, in her arms, had big eyes full of terror, his little hands gripping his mother's collar. She looked at me, her eyes mixed with fear, pleading, and a trace of desperation from being driven to the edge. I gave her a mild, or even friendly smile, and then I threw out my ultimate question. Ling Xue, so the question you really want to ask is, are you willing to accept my protection and manage the chores in exchange for food and absolute safety for you and your child? I emphasized the words protection and chores heavily. This isn't taking you in, it's employment. I am not a philanthropist, I am a boss. She froze, seemingly not expecting me to lay out the terms so nakedly, but she only hesitated for a second because from the door next door came again the sound of Zhang Hao's suppressed, angry curses. That voice was like a poisonous snake wrapping around her ankle. She shuddered violently, and tears welled up in her eyes. Then she looked at me and nodded solemnly, so I stepped aside to clear the doorway. Then welcome aboard, Ling Shui. As if granted a pardon, she held her child and almost stumbled into my home. I closed and deadbolted the door, completely shutting that man's world out. Almost the instant the lock clicked shut, Zhang Hao next door finally realized what had happened. He let out a beastly roar, followed by the sound of frantic door smashing. Ling Xue, you bitch, get out here and open the door. You dare betray me. I am going to kill you. Lin Sui stiffened all over, her face deathly pale, trembling like a leaf in the wind as she held her child. I walked up to her and gently patted her shoulder. Stop acting. Those cheap tears of yours can only move yourself and the trash can. I said faintly, from now on, in here, you and your child are safe. She looked up at me in disbelief. I pointed to the living room sofa. Settle down first. Your work officially starts tomorrow. The cursing continued like a dirge of incompetent rage, while inside my house, it was completely peaceful. A new day started with Zhang Hao's curses from next door. The curses were intermittent, with nothing new, tossing back and forth. The same few swear words. I turned a deaf ear to it, taking milk and toast from the fridge and unhurriedly preparing breakfast. Lin Xue and Xiaobao sat on the sofa. Both the adult and the child looked uneasy. Xiaobao's stomach growled at an inopportune moment. Lin Xu's face grew even paler. I pushed a portion of breakfast toward her. Eat. Once you're done, your work begins. Flattered and anxious, Lin Xue took it, feeding the child little by little, while not daring to eat herself. I ignored her, finished my portion, wiped my mouth, took out a walkie-talkie and a piece of paper from the storage room, handing them to her. Take this and go knock on the door of 301. Lin Xue looked at the note, her hands trembling slightly. On the paper was a line of text. Aunt Wang, are you willing to trade all your cigarettes and alcohol for 3 liters of purified water and 2 packs of instant noodles? She looked up at me, her eyes full of terror. Zhang Hao was outside. She didn't dare move. I looked at her, my tone flat. You are my person now. If he dares to touch you, it's equivalent to him asking me, do you want me to die? My words seemed to give her a surge of courage. She took a deep breath, as if making some kind of resolution, held her child, and walked to the door with the walkie-talkie and note. Through the door monitor, I could clearly see everything in the hallway. Lin Xuan knocked on the door of 301. Almost simultaneously, the door opposite mine was yanked open with a bang. Zhang Hao rushed out like a red-eyed beast. He hadn't shaved in days. His eye sockets were sunken, and he exuded a sour stench. You actually dared to come out, he roared. Reaching out to grab Lin Su's hair, Lin Sue let out a terrified scream and tightly closed her eyes, but the hand stopped in mid-air. My cold voice echoed through the entire hallway via the intercom. Zhang Hao, are you sure you want to touch her? Zhang Hao's movements froze. He slowly turned his head, staring fixedly at the camera by my door. His gaze looked as though he wanted to eat me alive, yet he didn't dare to do a thing. The door to room 101 opened. Aunt Wang poked her head out. Trembling, Lin Xue handed over the note in her hand. After Aunt Wang read it, she hardly hesitated, and immediately went back inside, bringing out a pile of cigarettes and liquor for the exchange, which went smoothly. Clutching the supplies with her head down, Lin Xue quickly walked back to my place. She didn't dare look at Zhang Hao again the whole time. Right in front of Zhang Hao, I had Lin Xue take inventory of this haul, and then gave Xiaobao a sausage as a reward. This scene was undoubtedly the last straw that broke the camel's back. Zhang Hao let out a mournful roar. He went completely mad. He no longer cared about any rules, and charged fiercely at my door like a raging bull. Hearing a loud bang, the steel core I spent a fortune reinforcing made the security door completely unfazed. Only the spot on the door panel where he hit was slightly dented. Nearby, Lin Xue and her son cowered in the corner in fear, their faces pale. But I smiled. It was finally here. The most primitive method, which is unfortunately also the most stupid. I walked to the door and didn't open the peephole, but instead pressed an inconspicuous switch next to it. Outside, Zhang Hao raised his fist, just about to smash it down, but his movement abruptly halted. He seemed to be hit by something invisible, like taking a punch, his whole body arching backward. As he violently convulsed, his hair stood on end, and a hissing sound came from his mouth. It was the high voltage I installed in the door's interlayer. A few seconds later, I turned off the switch. Like a puddle of mud, Zhang Hao slid down my door and collapsed onto the floor, his body emitting a stench of burnt flesh. I opened the door, just leaving a crack, enough for me to see him and him to see me. He lay on the ground like a dead fish out of water, panting heavily, his eyes filled with nothing but despair and terror. Lin Xue stood behind me, looking at her former husband. Seeing this miserable state, her lips trembled, with a complex expression in her eyes. The timing had arrived. Looking down from above at Zhang Hao on the ground, every word coldly, like a precise scalpel, dissecting his final psychological defense. Zhang Hao, are you going to admit it? If I hadn't reinforced the door in advance and hadn't installed the electric grid, you would have broken in just now. He shuddered all over, unable to deny it. I continued to interrogate, my voice not loud, but every word was piercing. Are you going to admit that, after breaking in, you would take all my supplies and then vent your anger on Lin Xue and me, causing us irreparable harm? A trapped beast-like whimper came from Zhang Hao's throat. Looking at Lin Xue behind me, a trace of pleading finally showed in his eyes. Lin Xue subconsciously took a step back, avoiding his gaze. This step completely crushed him. Seeing his completely deadened eyes, I issued the final and most merciful judgment. Zhang Hao, are you willing to give me all the remaining supplies in your house in exchange for the right to visit your son once a day? In that instant, Zhang Hao's pupils completely lost focus. Like a mollusk that had all its bones extracted, he slumped on the ground without even a sliver of strength to struggle. After a few seconds of dead silence, he squeezed out a broken syllable from his throat, as hoarse as a rusty piece of iron. Rubbing together, it was a single word which exhausted all his dignity and strength. Behind me, Lin Xu's body swayed imperceptibly. Holding onto the wall, I closed my eyes. Expressionless, I shut the door on that pile of mud. Would you be willing to help me inventory the supplies? I turned around and asked her calmly. She snapped her eyes open, her eyes filled with terror and confusion, but ultimately fading into a resigned numbness. She nodded. I opened the door. Zhang Hao was still lying there like a dead dog. I didn't spare him another glance, walking straight to the door opposite, using the key he had just handed over to open his apartment door. A murky wave mixed with sourness and body odor hit my face as the air rushed out. The living room was a complete mess, with half-eaten instant noodle cups and torn snack bags thrown all over the floor. The sofa was tilted to one side with unknown stains left on it. This was no longer the warm, tidy home filled with laughter that I remembered. Lin Xue followed behind me, looking at the mess, her eyes instantly turning red. I knew what she was thinking about, but I had no interest in comforting her. Stop acting. Your cheap tears only move yourself and the trash can, I said coldly, abruptly cutting off her emotional display. She stiffened all over and forcefully held back her tears. That's right, I am just that vicious. In the apocalypse, sympathy is the most useless thing. Lin Xue and I silently began moving the supplies. Zhang Hao's stash was quite substantial. Besides what I had given Lin Xue before, there were several boxes of biscuits, a few cans of food, and some scattered snacks. The most valuable items were 2 large jugs of purified water. Just as I picked up the last box of compressed biscuits, a black hardcover notebook fell from the gap between the box and the wall, hitting the floor with a smack. I paused. Lin Xue saw it too, and instinctively went to pick it up. Don't move, I ordered. Alarm bells ringing in my head. A brute like Zhang Hao had a habit of keeping a diary. What could be inside? I crouched down but didn't touch the notebook immediately. My gaze swept over it like a searchlight, carefully inspecting every detail of the notebook. An ordinary black cover, without any decoration. It didn't look like a record of personal feelings, but more like work notes. I reached out my fingertips, touching the cold, smooth cover. Slowly, I turned to the first page. Unfamiliar handwriting, carrying a hint of madness, fiercely pierced my eyes. Month X, day X, sunny. Damn it, back in this hellhole again. Back to the day before the apocalypse? Why? Why me? My heart felt like it was grabbed by a giant invisible hand, squeezing it hard until it instantly stopped beating. A cold sweat suddenly slid down my spine to my tailbone. I thought I was the only reincarnator in this world, the god who held the ultimate script. But this diary was like a resounding slap, striking me hard across the face. It turned out I wasn't the only one. Zhang Hao was too. My brain raced as countless details I had overlooked. At this moment, ED together into a complete chain of logic. Why did he target me so precisely on the very first day? Why did he show no surprise at my hoarding of supplies, but only naked greed? Why did he react so quickly to my logical counterkill, even instantly thinking of inciting the neighbors? Because, just like me, he carried memories from a previous life. I forced myself to calm down and continued reading. The contents of the diary were chaotic, filled with curses and venting, but the information mixed within made my scalp tingle. In my previous life, I died on the 7th day. I was robbed by that man using a damn rhetorical question, taking all my things and leaving me to starve. Starve to death. No, EDNT starved to death. I was killed by them. That man had no idea. You cannot say no. Wasn't the biggest deadly rule at all. The real terror came later. A type of monster will appear that reacts lethally to the word no. As long as you say no to them, you will be instantly torn to shreds. That bastard thought he had won, but he has no idea that the supplies he stole will only make him their primary hunting target. In this life, I must stay ahead of him. I will make him taste the despair I felt in my past life. My fingers gripped the edge of the diary so tightly that my knuckles turned white. So Zhang Hao didn't starve to death because of me in his previous life. He encountered that monster after I took all his supplies, and because he couldn't satisfy its question, or say no, he was ultimately killed by it. And his first target after his rebirth is me. He doesn't just want to steal my supplies. He wants me to repeat the exact way he died in his past life. What a vicious scheme. If I hadn't outsmarted him, the one lying on the ground right now, like a dead dog, would be me. I closed the diary and took a deep breath. My wildly beating heart gradually calmed down. After the immense terror came a deeper sense of relief and a trace of annoyance. Zhang Hao, thank you for your gift. This intel is 10,000 times more precious than those supplies. What does it matter if there's a reincarnator and a new monster? This Doomsday game just got a lot more interesting, right? Amid this eerie and violent roaring, echoing from far outside the window, Lin Xu and her son screamed in terror and hugged each other. I walked to the window, lifted a corner of the curtain, and looked outside. The real Doomsday is only just beginning. The roaring outside, like a rusty saw, repeatedly cut through the silent night. The sound was filled with an inhuman, viscous malice. Even through the thick walls, it made one's hair stand on end. Lin Xu and her son Peng Peng had already turned pale, holding tightly onto each other, huddled in the corner of the sofa. I walked to the window and carefully pulled back a corner of the curtain. The streetlights downstairs had gone out at some point. In the darkness, a twisted figure at an extremely bizarre angle, slowly creeping toward our building. It looked human, with all four limbs intact, but its joints seemed to be bent backward. With every step it took, its body twitched unnaturally, making a cracking sound of dislocated bones. This must be what Zhang Hao wrote about in his diary, the forbidden word beast. It stopped at the entrance of our apartment building and looked up. Where its face should have been, there was only a patch of smooth skin, with no eyes, ears, mouth, or nose. There was just a pitch-black vortex, slowly swirling. I covered my mouth tightly, not daring to make a single sound. Suddenly, the monster stopped moving. The black hole on its face was aimed exactly in my direction, and a cold, completely emotionless thought appeared directly in my mind. Are you willing to share your warmth with me? My heart instantly skipped a beat. It was a lethal question. Zhang Hao's diary stated it clearly. He died in his previous life under the forbidden word beast's questioning. You couldn't say no. If you did, you would be rapidly torn to shreds. But saying yes didn't guarantee survival either. Its question was full of traps. What is warmth? Is it my figure heat or the temperature in my room? If I agreed, would it just phase right through the wall and suck my life dry? Zhang Hao's diary mentioned that he couldn't satisfy the monster's demand, which implies that after agreeing, there are follow-up conditions. This is a guaranteed death trap. My brain was working in overdrive. Calm down. I must stay calm. The rules are rigid, but people are adaptable. Since it's a question, there must be a loophole. I can't refuse, but I can twist its question, or even give it a new definition. I stared at that terrifying figure downstairs and formed a thought in my mind, projecting it back in response. Are you asking if I am willing to trade this cup of hot water in my hands? Will you disappear from my sight immediately? I was holding a cup of hot water poured to warm my hands, and its scalding temperature became my only lifeline at this moment. I replaced the vague concept of warmth with something concrete. Hot water. At the same time, I stated my condition. You disappear immediately. The Jinyu beast downstairs froze. The black hole on its face stopped spinning, seemingly processing this unprecedented logical circuit. Time ticked by, each second feeling like a century, so agonizingly long. My back was completely drenched in cold sweat. Finally, that cold consciousness echoed in my mind again. The moment the voice faded, the Jinyu beast's body began to flicker like TV static. A few seconds later, it vanished into thin air on the spot. I was completely drained of energy, leaning against the cold wall, panting heavily. However, before I could fully recover my senses, a loud crash suddenly came from outside. It was Zhang Hao's door being kicked open. Zhang Hao rushed out with his hair disheveled. His eyes were bloodshot, wearing a maniacal smile on his face. He saw that I was safe and sound, saw Lin Xue and the child behind me, and the smile on his face twisted even more. Why? Why are you still alive? He roared, like a beast driven into a corner. Right at that moment, the Jinyu beast that had just vanished appeared in the hallway without warning, blocking Zhang Hao's path perfectly. It aimed its faceless void at Zhang Hao, and the cold consciousness descended once again. Are you willing to share your despair with me? Everyone was stunned. Zhang Hao froze too, but then he burst into an earth-shattering roar of laughter. Despair? I am made of nothing but fucking despair now. If you want it, it's all yours. He smiled and willingly opened his arms, walking toward the Jinyu beast. He didn't question it, didn't struggle, didn't even hesitate for a split second. After losing his wife and child, his supplies, failing his revenge, and being haunted by the pre-rebirth nightmares, his mind had completely collapsed. To him, death was perhaps the only release. The Jinyu beast seemed very satisfied with this answer. In the next instant, its movements were so fast, I couldn't even see them clearly. I only saw a dark shadow violently shoot up, accompanied by a sharp, piercing sound of rushing wind. Countless black tentacles burst out from its body, like sharp blades, instantly piercing through Zhang Hao's body. Zhang Hao's body subsequently collapsed. Lin Xue let out a scream and fainted on the spot, while I desperately covered the child's eyes. After dealing with Zhang Hao, the Jingyu beast vanished with his corpse, disappeared. The hallway was left with only a thick, lingering stench of blood. I didn't feel the slightest thrill of revenge in my heart. It turns out, true settling of scores isn't watching your enemy die, but rather, when he dies, you find that you feel absolutely nothing. Zhang Hao was dead, but this insane world was just raising its curtain. Personal grudges were as insignificant as a speck of dust in the face of this colossal survival crisis. Right at that moment, another mournful scream came from downstairs. But this time, it belonged to a human. Following that was an old man's weak cry for help. Help. Somebody. Please save me. This voice belonged to Grandpa Wang. In my past life, when I was about to starve to death, it was Grandpa Wang who lived downstairs, who secretly slipped half a hard-steamed bun through my door crack. I rushed to the window, only to see another Jinyu beast cornering Grandpa Wang by the flower bed downstairs. The cold consciousness began to echo in the air. My blood began to boil like never before at this moment. In that split second, I made a decision. Lin Xue, watch the house. Don't open the door no matter what you hear. I grabbed a bottle of high-concentration alcohol and a windproof lighter that I had prepared on the table and yanked the door open. I rushed to the stairs and shouted at the monster downstairs that was about to reach its tentacles toward Grandpa Wang. Hey, you faceless monster down there. Let me ask you, are you willing to give up that shriveled old man in exchange for a tender, energetic young man upstairs, proactively walking towards you? The air downstairs froze instantly. The beast that was about to attack suddenly stiffened. That face with nothing but a black hole slowly looked up. Across the pitch-black corridor, it locked onto me. The logic replacement took effect again. Compared to an old man drained of life force, my newly reborn soul was like an absolute feast to it. A cold, ruthless intent instantly rushed into my mind as it abandoned Grandpa Wang and crawled toward me on all fours at terrifying speed. Run, Xiaolan. Leave me alone. From downstairs came Grandpa Wang's tearful roar. Good. A crazed smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. In this world ruled by rules, running away is entirely useless. Taking the initiative to attack is the only way to survive. I stood at the corner between the second and third floors. This cramped, narrow space was an excellent ambush spot. The moment the monster's figure appeared around the corner, without hesitation, I smashed an open bottle of alcohol into its black hole face and immediately flicked my windproof lighter. Then, I asked, are you willing to accept the baptism of this passion to warm your cold body? The flame drew an elegant arc in the air. The monster's logic was still processing the concepts of passion and warmth. Its instincts made it unable to refuse this seemingly positive proposal. The blue flame instantly combusted in the narrow corridor. The alcohol splashed on its skin immediately turned into bone-clinging agony. The monster let out an ear-piercing shriek. It wasn't burning to death. Rather, because it couldn't comprehend this intense physical pain, the logical conflict with the concept of warmth caused its core rules to fall into complete chaos. It rammed wildly, smashing against the walls as its tentacles flailed about, battering the corridor into a mess. Taking advantage of its momentary chaos, I struck again. Are you in a lot of pain? Then are you willing to stop breathing right now? To make this pain disappear completely? This was a lethal trap. If it wanted to stop the pain, it had to agree to stop breathing. The monster twitched violently in the raging fire. Before the concept of death could fully transmit through its mind, its body instantly went limp like a deflated balloon, turning into a puddle of black sludge that sizzled in the flames. I leaned against the wall, panting heavily, my heart nearly pounding out of my chest. I won the bet again. Downstairs, Grandpa Wang scrambled up in shock. Looking at me, he burst into tears and was about to kneel. Xiaolan, you did this to save me, my old bones. I grabbed hold of him, but my gaze looked past him at the doors upstairs and downstairs that had quietly cracked open. The commotion just now was too loud. All the rats in the building had woken up. They saw me kill the monster, and they saw me save someone. At this moment, there was inevitable fear in those eyes, but even more greed, because they knew I was capable and that I had supplies. Grandpa Wang, I raised my voice, sounding as cold as the apocalyptic winter wind. In my past life, in the past, you gave me half a steamed bun, and today, I paid you back with a life. The debt is settled. I let go of him and drew a boning knife from behind my waist. The blade gleamed coldly in the firelight. I walked step by step into the corridor, stopping in the center, my gaze sweeping over those prying eyes. Have you seen enough? The corridor fell dead silent. No one dared to make a sound. I know what you're thinking. You want to steal my things, and you want me to protect you. I sneered. Sure. As soon as these words came out, several door cracks instantly widened. But then I changed my tone. My tone was chilling. In this world, where you can't say no, I am the translator of the rules. You saw what happened to Zhang Hao just now, and you saw the fate of those two monsters. You've seen it all. If you want to live, in 10 minutes, gather at my door with all the supplies from your homes. I will redistribute them, and tell you how to survive. Of course. I waved the knife in my hand, my eyes more terrifying than the monsters. You can also choose not to come. but I will ask those who don't come a question. Are you willing to bet your whole family's lives on whether my knife is fast enough? At that moment, I was no longer the pathetic wimp bullied by Zhang Hao. I was the judge of this building. 10 minutes later, the third-floor corridor was packed with people. No one dared to bet on the answer to that question. Even the tattooed man from the 5th floor, who was usually the most arrogant, was now obediently holding a box of instant noodles, shrinking his neck, and standing in the crowd. Fear is the best tool for ruling, and order is often built on absolute violence. When Lin Xue opened the door and saw this scene, she covered her mouth in shock. Lin Xue, get a notebook and write this down. I ordered directly without looking back. From today on, you are the chief of supplies. All supplies go into the warehouse and will be distributed according to contribution. Mr. Wang, you're well liked. You're in charge of keeping an eye on these people. If anyone dares to hoard or pull any little tricks behind my back, tell me immediately. Mr. Wang straightened his back as if regaining the vigor of his youth. Hey, Xiaolan, don't worry. Rest assured, I'll see who dares. Someone in the crowd moved their lips, seeming to protest. I swept a glance over and that person immediately lowered their head. I wouldn't leave any hidden dangers behind. Looking at this motley crew, I threw out the first iron rule of my new dynasty in this camp. My questions are absolute commands, when you only need to answer with one word. Now tell me, are you willing to give me your loyalty and lives in order to survive? In the narrow corridor, dozens of uneven voices, but they merged into a new power, born of despair. From that moment on, the ordinary survivor disappeared, replaced by a new emperor holding the power of life and death over this building. In the week that followed, I led them to reinforce the stairs, seal off the lower floor windows, and transform this old residential building into a steel fortress. I taught them how to use logic to evade the monster's questions, and how to use leading questions to obtain resources. As the team grew, morale gathered, and the camp got on track, I became the de facto new emperor. Lin Xue was my chief steward, responsible for registering and distributing supplies. Grandpa Wang became my eyes and ears, strolling through the building every day to collect complaints and news from every household. With more people came more complicated thoughts. There were always one or two smart Alecs who thought they had figured out the rules and wanted to prove themselves to me. The one who jumped out today was a bespectacled, gentle-looking man named Li Kang. He had been very active when he joined the camp, and knowing a bit about radios, he helped us fix the transceiver, which was considered a great merit. At this moment, he was standing at the supply distribution point, saying to Lin Xue, Sister Lin Xue, I want to use this intelligence to exchange for some things for our camp. Is that okay with you? Lin Xue answered formulaically according to the rules I set. So, Brother Li, you mean you are willing to exchange your intelligence for supplies of equal value from our warehouse, right? This was a firewall I had set up, emphasizing equal value. The Li Kang pushed up his glasses, a glint of light flashing across the lenses. No, my question is, he paused after every word, his voice not loud, but loud enough for everyone in line to hear. As the leader of the camp, are you willing to trade half of the canned food in the warehouse for my promise to provide a crucial, life-saving piece of intelligence for the camp in the future? The surroundings instantly fell silent, so my gaze shifted from the cans to his face. Half the cans represented almost half of our camp's supplies, trading our solid foundation for survival for his empty promise. What a classic grift. He wasn't asking Lin Xue, he was asking me. He precisely exploited the rules. You can't say no. If I said no, how the rules would punish me, no one knew, and no one dared to try. If I agreed, my authority would collapse in an instant. If today he could trade a promise for half our cans, tomorrow someone would dare trade a ghost story for all our water, and order would be completely gone. I crossed my arms and slowly walked out from behind the crowd. I walked up to him and smiled. Li Kang, that's a very good question you're asking. The corners of his mouth twitched upwards uncontrollably, but I didn't quite catch it. Do you want me to help translate your question a bit more accurately, so everyone can understand what you mean? I stared into his eyes, not waiting for his reply, and threw out my question at a rapid-fire pace. Do you mean you want to ask me, are you willing to take the lead and give away half the rations we all rely on to survive for free? To me, Li Kang, and bet on a future verbal promise from me that might have zero value? Is that what you mean? My voice suddenly rose. Every word, like a bullet fired at everyone present. The smugness on Li Kang's face instantly froze. He didn't expect me not to fall for his trick at all, but instead directly and nakedly slice open his filthy intentions and display them bloody in front of everyone. The crowd began to stir. The way they looked at Li Kang changed from watching a show to scrutiny and suspicion. He started sweating on his forehead, his lips quivering but unable to speak a single word, because he couldn't say no. Once he did, it would mean admitting that his question just now meant exactly what I translated. I took a step forward, almost right up in his face, lowered my voice, and using a volume only the two of us could hear, said, Save your cheap tricks, they can only move yourself and the trash can. Then I stepped back sharply and faced the crowd again. Or rather, Li Kang, did you actually want to ask everyone another question? My gaze swept over everyone. Did you want to ask everyone present? Are you willing to trust someone who, in the apocalypse, doesn't want to contribute value but only wants to use rule loopholes to hollow out the group's resources and play everyone for fools? The crowd completely blew up. Holy shit. So that's what he meant. Damn it, I knew it was too good to be true. Trading a promise for half the cans, he's trying to make us all work for him for free. Li Kang's face instantly turned ashen. He couldn't deny any of my questions because the iron chain of the rules tightly locked his throat. Every moment of his silence was a sliver of tacit admission. I looked at him like looking at a rat caught in a trap. Now was the time for a public execution. I raised my hand, signaling everyone to quiet down. Li Kang, now I'll give you one last chance to ask a question. I stared intently at his dodging eyes and said clearly, word by word, do you want to ask everyone one last question? Everyone. Li Kang was briefly possessed by greed just now, attempting to use a logic trap to harm the group's interests and seek personal gain. I am willing to accept punishment. Are you willing to let me get the hell out of this camp? When this question was asked, the whole corridor fell deathly silent. Li Kang was trembling all over. The look in his eyes towards me was full of fear and pleading. Everyone was looking at him, waiting for him to ask this question. Or rather, waiting for me to ask this question for him. If he didn't say it, I'd say it for him. I turned to the crowd and raised my voice. Is everyone willing to let someone who tries to divide us and destroy our foundation of trust continue to stay here? Okay, if we let him have a second or third time, will he push us into the abyss? We're willing to let him get out. We are willing. This time was neat, the answer, uniform, and deafening. Under the rule of not being able to say no, this became our camp's first collective consensus. Li Kang slumped to the ground, his face ashen. I looked down from above, watching him, without a single ripple of emotion in my heart. You heard them. I turned around, not sparing him another glance. Ling Xue gave him a bottle of water and a pack of biscuits, then asked him to leave. Was officially established at this moment. Just then, in the corner, the radio Li Kang had fixed suddenly let out a piercing burst of static. A strange man's voice, with a massive echo, came out from it. Survivors of the entire city, hello. Are you willing to give up your pointless resistance and join our community of shared human destiny? The voice sounded like it came from the abyss, drilling into everyone's ears through the poor radio waves. Hand over all your supplies, give up your ridiculous private territories, and accept the most efficient, unified management. Are you willing? The man on the broadcast didn't sound threatening at all. His tone was as calm as if reading a weather forecast. But it was exactly this calmness that made a chill rise from the soles of our feet, shooting straight to the top of our heads. This was an open conspiracy, a massive trap laid bare in the sunlight, yet one you couldn't refuse. The survivors behind me, whose faces had just shown a trace of relief from expelling Li Kang, instantly froze. Fear submerged the entire corridor like an invisible tide. Uncle Wang's lips trembled as he looked at me, his eyes full of terror. Lin Xue subconsciously pulled her child behind her, her face pale. Everyone's gazes were like searchlights focusing on me. In their eyes, I was a god who could fight against the rules, but only I knew clearly. I wasn't a god. I was just an ordinary person with one more experience of dying than others. This man on the broadcast was completely different from the jokes like Zhang Hao and Li Kang, who ignorantly exploited the rules. He not only understood the rules, but also found a way to maximize their efficiency. Using the broadcast, he didn't need to ask people one by one. He just needed to sit in one place and ask the entire city, and he could impose his will on everyone who could hear the broadcast. My rebirth advantage was swiftly leveled at this moment. It was like everyone now had the launch codes for nuclear weapons. The bullet I had prepared in advance was no longer the only trump card. The pressure, like a physical boulder, pressed heavily on my heart. Should we stay here, waiting for him to use one irrefutable question after another, to squeeze our pitiful assets dry, and eventually make us willingly walk out, to become his slaves? Or... My gaze swept over everyone's fearful faces and swept over the child in Lin Xu's arms with those innocent eyes. No, I didn't exhaust myself crawling back from hell just to change locations and methods only to die again. I took a deep breath, and the churning, irritable pressure in my chest was forcefully suppressed. I looked at them and slowly spoke. I am originally a high mountain, not a stream. The crowd was stunned, not understanding what I meant. I smiled, a smile devoid of any warmth, filled only with an icy sharpness. A small stream gets swallowed by a wider river. But I walked over to the radio, listening to the sizzling static. I reached out my hand, and under everyone's astonished gaze, slowly snapped off the antenna. With a crisp snap, the annoying noise was completely cut off. As the whole world slowly woke up, I turned to look at the dumbfounded crowd. He asked if we were willing, but he forgot we also have the right to ask questions. Staying here means handing over that right to ask questions, yielding it to others. We'd become meat on the chopping block, only able to wait for him to decide where to make the next cut. Are you resigned to this? No one spoke, but their clenched fists and reddened eyes already told me the answer. Good. I walked over to the wall where a city map we brought back from a supply run hung. My fingertip tapped lightly on the very center of the map at the location marked as the radio and television tower. Instead of waiting for him to find us, we should go find him first. Ling Xue, I ordered. He immediately stood straight. Take inventory of all our weapons and usable vehicles. To pick 3 of the strongest and most agile people. Form an assault squad immediately. Yes, Uncle Hua. Hey, you and the remaining people must immediately carry out the final reinforcement of our building. From now on, this is our fortress, and also our way out. I paused, my gaze sweeping over everyone. Remember, we're not going to surrender, nor are we going to negotiate. My voice grew cold, carrying unquestionable resolve. I am going to tell him that this city has 2 kings, or rather, there will soon be only one. We drove a modified off-road vehicle, with steel plates added to the front. Like a silent beast, it traversed through the dead, silent city. No one spoke in the car. There was only the low roar of the engine and the crunching of tires over gravel. The 3 people Ling Shui selected. One was Li Mo, a veteran, responsible for driving and keeping watch. The other 2 were twin brothers, Da Mao and E Mao, former gym coaches. Tall and burly, they tightly gripped fire axes in their hands. Very soon, we arrived in front of our destination. Their camp was even more heavily guarded than I had imagined. Li Mo parked the car 50 meters away from the first checkpoint. Brother, what should we do? They have guns. Li Mao's voice was a bit hoarse. I pushed the car door open and stepped out alone. I saw at least 5 or 6 dart gun muzzles behind the checkpoint, aiming at me. A leading man shouted at me from a distance, "Are you willing to turn around and leave here immediately?" A very clever opening. To this question, I couldn't answer yes, nor could I say no, because once I said no, according to the literal meaning of the rules, it meant I wasn't willing to leave, which equated to surrendering without a fight. But I smiled. I stopped in my tracks and asked him loudly, "I am here to see your leader. May I ask if you want to ask me? Are you willing to lay down all your defenses, walk into our base alone, and accept our interrogation?" I took a potentially hostile act and directly turned it into a question they initiated. The man who shouted was visibly stunned. He didn't expect me to reply with such a question. The air seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Finally, a voice came from the walkie-talkie behind him, carrying a hint of amusement. "Interesting. Let him in." The wire mesh gates slowly pulled open. I looked back and gave Limo and the others a reassuring look, then walked in alone, step by step. Soon, I was taken inside the radio and television station. It had been transformed into a massive living area. People were coming and going, yet it was eerily quiet. Everyone was expressionless, like pre-programmed robots. This kind of order sent a chill down my spine. Ultimately, I met their leader in the broadcasting hall on the top floor. He looked to be in his 40s, wearing gold-rimmed glasses and a clean white shirt. Rather than looking like a doomsday warlord, he looked more like a college professor. He was sitting behind a large anchor's desk, slowly cleaning his glasses. "Welcome, guest who breaks through using logic." He looked up, his eyes behind the lenses as sharp as an eagle's. "You must be the professor who likes to ask questions." I unceremoniously pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. He smiled, seemingly unbothered by my rudeness. "In the apocalypse, knowledge is power." He put his glasses back on, leaned forward slightly, and crossed his index fingers on the desk. "Your appearance pleasantly surprised me. I thought I was the only awake person in this city. Since you knew I existed, and still used that stupid broadcast to test me, don't you think that was completely unnecessary?" I retorted bluntly. "No, it wasn't." He shook his head, the smile on his lips growing wider. "That was a declaration. I was simply declaring my presence and taking the opportunity to clean up those participants who couldn't even understand the rules." His words revealed an undisguised arrogance and disregard for life. My mind started racing. This man would be 10,000 times harder to deal with than Zhang Hao. Zhang Hao's greed and viciousness were written all over his face, but the evil of the man in front of me was hidden under the wrapper of logic and intellect. He didn't enjoy the plundering itself, but the thrill of controlling everything through intellectual crushing. He looked at me and suddenly threw out the first real question. "Since you came here on your own accord, you must be a smart person as well. So, are you willing to contribute your wisdom for the future of all survivors and join us?" This question was 100 times more venomous than the guards downstairs. It was a seemingly bright trap. If I couldn't answer it, it would be equivalent to tacitly acknowledging his leadership. My brain rapidly analyzed every word he said. Words like contribute all implied an unequal subordinate relationship. What he wanted was not an ally, but a smart subordinate. I met his gaze and smiled. "Professor, your question is very interesting. But before I answer, can I understand it as you asking me, are you willing to cooperate equally with my team, to jointly develop a plan that guarantees everyone's basic rights, instead of making me unilaterally submit to you personally?" I replaced contribute with equal cooperation, and join us with jointly develop. Of the smile on the professor's face stiffened for the first time. He looked at me in silence for a full 10 seconds. The playfulness in his eyes gradually faded, replaced by a look of taking his opponent seriously. "You are even sharper than I imagined." He suddenly changed the subject. "Aren't you curious why I was able to establish such an order so easily?" Without waiting for my answer, he revealed the mystery himself. Because the rules themselves can be upgraded. When a person successfully controls the will of more than 100 people using the rules, he gets a chance to make a wish regarding the rules. My heart sank. The information advantage brought by my completely vanished at this moment. This was an unheard of secret to me. My first wish was that anyone who thinks no towards me would feel a needle like sharp pain. You see, order is established just like that. A fanatical light flickered in the professor's eyes. Instantly, a chill rushed straight to my brain. No wonder the people here acted like walking corpses. It wasn't that they didn't want to resist. They simply didn't dare to. Now, he leaned back in his chair again, restoring his posture of controlling everything. "Do you still think you have the right to talk to me about equality?" He thought this secret was enough to defeat me, but I found his most fatal blind spot in his words. I watched him looking smug about his genius design and suddenly found it a bit ridiculous. I spoke coldly. Stop acting. Your cheap self-indulgence can only amuse yourself and the trash can. The professor's expression changed completely. I stood up without looking at him again, and instead looked around the hall. At his subordinates, who were slightly restless because of my words, my gaze was like a scalpel dissecting the false piece here. I raised my hand and pointed at the aloof professor, my movements slow and clear, as if I were conducting a public sentencing. My voice was not loud, but like a clap of thunder, it exploded in everyone's heart. Professor, did you want to ask your followers if they are willing to attack innocent survivors for your personal ambition, becoming as inhuman as those monsters? My question, like a bomb dropped into a stagnant pool, made the entire hall buzz with shock. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the professor. Their gazes were no longer numb and hollow, but mixed with panic and even a trace of long-suppressed anger. The air seemed to freeze, with only faint murmurs spreading through the crowd, becoming monsters, attacking innocent survivors. These words accurately struck their very last bottom line as humans. The professor's face turned from pale to ghastly white. He stood up abruptly from his chair, and his proud rules of survival seemed to have failed at this moment, because my question didn't need them to answer yes or no. I was merely repeating a fact that they all knew perfectly well, but didn't dare to dwell on. I had voiced the agonizing question hidden in their hearts for them. He lost. From the moment I asked that question, he had already lost. Nonsense, finally erupted. Professor. His voice was so shrill, it cracked. He raised his trembling index finger at me. Don't spread rumors to confuse the public. Are you trying to ask everyone if they would rather trust an outsider and destroy the peace we've worked so hard to build? This was his final counterattack, attempting to antagonize me against everyone using the words outsider and peace. Unfortunately, it was too late. I completely ignored his question and met everyone's gaze instead. Calmly, emphasizing every word, I said, I am a high mountain, not a stream. My existence is not to merge into someone's territory, but to give more struggling streams a direction to converge into rivers and seas. I paused and looked around at those wavering faces. Now, I'll give you a question that needs no answer. Are you willing to build an order with me that is truly for survival, rather than for someone's personal ambition? One that can fight against the monsters and let us sleep peacefully, instead of an order that will turn us into executioners tomorrow. As my voice fell, an uncontrollable commotion erupted in the crowd. The professors, cronies, the armed personnel standing beside him began to look at each other, the hands holding their weapons unconsciously loosened. The scales had completely tipped. Watching his followers turn against him, the professor lost all color in his face. He looked as if he had been completely drained, losing all his strength and slumping back into his chair. He had lost miserably. I didn't spare him another glance, but turned and went downstairs, asking them to bring Lin Xue and Grandpa Wang over. After they arrived, we began organizing people to take over the supplies and personnel. Everything was orderly, as if we were the true masters here, and it went even smoother than I had imagined. I slowly walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows in the hall, looking at the people I brought and the professors. Original faction on the square below, beginning to cautiously make contact and merge. A new, even larger survivor camp was taking shape right beneath my feet. From today onwards, I am no longer an individual struggling to survive. I have become a leader. But before I could even curl my lips into a smile, a cold, familiar, mechanical voice exploded in my mind without warning. Novice protection period ended. Rules